Let me paint you a picture. You're walking around Barcelona. You are looking at the incredible works of Gaudí at the Sagrada Familia, Casa Batlló, Casa Milla, which all have intricate facades, vibrant mosaics, and organic forms that define the city's distinctive architectural style. Now you're walking around Prague, seeing Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, and Art Nouveau buildings. There's a sense of architectural richness that reflects centuries of cultural and artistic influence. And now you're walking around Atlanta, Georgia, where everything seems somewhat soulless, particularly these regions that have experienced recent rapid urbanization. Oddly enough, everything is really starting to look the same. You can argue that people have lost touch with the beauty of the past. And generally speaking, people love ornamentation and crafted aesthetics. There has been a popular hope that we will revert back to this age of beautiful design aesthetics. People are asking, why don't we build beautiful buildings anymore? Let's talk about it. Gothic, Renaissance, classical, and Victorian buildings all gave a sense of this grandeur that reflected societal values of beauty. It's interesting though, because I think people of older generations really strive to utilize architecture for creating something of lasting value for future generations to enjoy. In the 20th century, however, architecture began to favor functionality, giving rise to modernist and brutalist movements. Minimalist architecture is classified by clean lines, simplicity, and this emphasis on functionality, which often employs the sparse use of materials and a reduction of ornamentation. Just generally speaking, these movements dismissed ornamentation as being frivolous, and most importantly, they began to value economics above all else. Now, the guy, Louis Sullivan, who implemented this idea of form over function, didn't necessarily cause this wave of minimalism. In fact, it's much more complicated than that. Neither did Le Corbusier, and neither did the Bauhaus school. This shift towards minimalism is rather complex, and they have a lot of moving pieces. And I also want to note that modernism didn't just emerge because people grew tired of overly ornamented buildings. There was a change in taste. And change in taste is normal. Styles will naturally evolve as societal taste change. I mean, not too long ago were we wearing Victorian garb. We also are no longer layering our tank tops like we did in the early 2000s. Tastes change, preferences change. Historical moments greatly impact stylistic changes. World War II ended in 1945. Following the war, many cities faced demands for housing due to population growth, urbanization, and extensive destruction. Rebuilding everything needed to be quick and efficient. Enter the stage modernist architecture, which is characterized by simplicity. This approach prioritized practicality and mass production over decorative embellishments. It aligned with the urgent need for affordable and utilitarian construction to address this post-war housing crisis. Certain factors, including lack of suitable materials, labor shortage, and these increased birth rates, really exacerbated this whole crisis, and it became the new norm to see mass-produced housing. It evolved into an era of utilitarian dwelling units where cost efficiency superseded architecture's artistic merit. This effort to rebuild took form in multiple ways. You can see these tower blocks across Europe and America. There was also this concept of modular housing. These units could be mass-produced off-site and assembled on-site, like Alton's estate in London. In America, where there was more land, you saw things like suburbias popping up. Levittown, New York is a notable example of a post-war suburban development characterized by rows of standardized, portable, single-family homes built quickly to house returning veterans and their families. I mean, truly, imagine not being able to get a housing unit because they blew the budget on crown molding and exterior details, and everyone had a Juliet balcony. I mean, or even doorknobs. Not a good look, right? And also, Beans in the back of the video here would really appreciate it if you subscribed and liked this video. We should also talk about material evolution. In the earlier eras, stone, wood, and brick were the primary building materials, and people typically regard these building materials to have a greater charm and aesthetic appeal to them versus what we build with today, which is steel and glass. There's also a level of craftsmanship associated with these materials. These materials necessitated a high level and attention to detail when sourcing, installing, carving out all of these materials into architecture. With the Industrial Revolution, there was this radical shift towards utilizing steel, glass, and concrete. Steel, glass, and concrete are far more cost-effective when compared to traditional building materials. Imagine quarrying stone or handcrafting brick. I mean, it's just more efficient, right? Plus, these newer materials offer greater structural capabilities. Versatility too was faster to use these materials too, therefore expediting construction timelines, which all of these benefits led to their widespread adoption of new construction materials and building practices. Modern materials really enabled modernism to be carried out. I mentioned the Villa Savoy. They used reinforced concrete. This was a very new concept. Prefabricated houses can now be streamlined. Famous architects like Le Corbusier really demonstrated the potential of modernist architecture, making it a turning point in architectural history. Now, I'm sure the thought also crossed your mind that, wow, rebuilding whole metropolises probably cost a lot of money. Let's talk about profit motives as well. People learned how to cut corners, of course, making sure that their buildings could be cheaper. And I'm sure by now you've guessed it. If we have an intricate cladding system at play, it was probably VE'd. It's interesting though, because I think people of older generations really strive to utilize architecture for creating something of lasting value for future generations to enjoy. People really thought about the idea of leaving a legacy behind. This motivation really seems to be gone in this new age of prioritizing profit. I do want to pause here and make a note. The construction of older, highly ornamented buildings was often facilitated by the extensive use of unpaid or severely underpaid labor. All of these amazing, majestic European cathedrals I've been showing and palaces, the reason why they were able to be built is because the labor force often consisted of serfs and peasants working in hazardous conditions without proper compensation or rights. So this reliance on unpaid and unjust labor allowed for the creation of these highly ornate structures that, if built today with fair labor practices, would incur significantly higher costs. So while these contemporary buildings that I'm showing throughout the video may lack the ornamentation of their historical counterparts, this shift reflects a more equitable treatment of labor. And due to workers' rights being prioritized, this contributes to the overall cost of construction, but ensures the ethical treatment and safety of the workforce. Now back to the video, thanks. Today, you can argue that housing is really seen as a commodity instead of places to live. Housing is primarily viewed as a tradable asset rather than as an essential place for habitation. The past designers and architects were really encouraged to think about how residential design provides this sense of belonging for individuals and its habitants, or even residential design being an expression of culture, but truly this motivation is gone, and the focus is more on financial value and profit. Now, we talked a lot about post-war historical influences, but I also think that the 2008 housing recession has tremendous lingering effects. The 2008 recession really exposed certain vulnerabilities seen within the housing market, built on speculative practices and unsustainable debt. And by speculative practices, what I mean by that is I'm referring to owners and developers buying and selling properties with the intention of profiting from increases on their market value, rather than using them for their intended purposes as homes. This can lead to inflated housing prices, which all contributes to the affordable housing crisis. And because developers are really prioritizing profit over long-term longevity of buildings, it seems that the quality of building and design has plummeted, truly. I can't tell you how many times I see renovation projects online and Europeans quickly comment how American houses are truly built out of paper. With the focus being on short-term gains, lead developers will prioritize quantity over quality, resulting in hastily constructed buildings and the lack of thoughtful design and a sense of architectural coherence. The legacy of commodification persists as housing continues to be treated like a financial asset rather than being designed to fulfill a human need and a cultural need. It will continue to perpetuate inequalities. I also would like to talk about another little tangent, these 5/1 building types that I am seeing everywhere. They are completely dominating every redevelopment project. So what is it? A 5/1 building is characterized by 5 floors of residential, most likely residential units are framed with wood. Over 1 floor of a concrete structure that is either parking or most times you see a storefront. It's definitely a prominent trend in more contemporary urban environments. It's efficient and cost effective, but they all look the same to me. It can be constructed rather quickly because of how structurally it works, and definitely has this appeal due to its affordability, especially compared to traditional steel and concrete construction methods. By also integrating more rented commercial spaces on the first floor, it's more of an opportunity for the owners of these 5/1 buildings to really rake in the money. I feel like I'm going a little bit on a tangent, so let's step back and refocus. Now I kind of want to talk about urban shifts. More specifically, let's talk about the US landscape. We started seeing sprawling metropolises demand for skyscrapers and apartment blocks that can accommodate a maximum number of people within a limited urban space. People began to build upwards instead of outwards, trying to fit as many units as possible, and rather quickly it seemed that everything took on the same aesthetic look. You can also argue that office buildings really all look the same. There's no neighborhoods, there's no cultural differences expressed in the architecture itself. Another problem is sometimes it's bad when everyone wants to make it look like a standalone building. I don't know what's worse, honestly, like if every piece of architecture tries to be this iconic landmark. Car-centric policies heavily influence architecture and urban planning by shaping the design and layouts of cities to accommodate automobiles, often at the expense of other modes of transportation and other urban amenities. These policies typically prioritize the mere convenience of driving a car, which leads to the proliferation of extremely wide roads, expansive parking lots, and sprawling suburban developments designed around the needs of drivers rather than pedestrians or cyclists. As a result, urban environments become fragmented and less walkable. Car-centric design really supports the idea of urban sprawl, environmental degradation, social isolation, as communities become increasingly dependent on their cars. Overall, I think what happened is that with the emphasis being on practicality, it led to a sense of individualism. I understand a lot of commentary has been shared online about modernism and why it sucks and why we're still building like this. There's so many regions in America that just truly feel soulless. It is far cheaper to start integrating ornamentation back into building design. I know maybe you think this too, maybe it's inauthentic if we start using silicone molds and like a plaster mold for our crowning instead of like authentic materials. But architecture is a extremely dynamic industry, so we'll see what we cook up within the next couple of years. If you liked this video, please be sure to check out this video on why you're lonely and the lack of third places in our society.